It's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. We're joined today by Claude Guibal, senior correspondent for flagship public radio station France Inter. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
All right. Looking rested and relaxed, Franco-Syrian photojournalist Amr Abed Rabo.
Didn't have any rest this summer.
No rest. Okay. Well, plenty of work. Plenty of work for Matthew Dalton, I presume? Paris correspondent for the Wall Street Journal?
I'm just back from vacation.
Just back from vacation.
I have to confess.
It's France.
Yeah.
And we always love visitors, especially during the summer. France 24 Rome correspondent Josephine McKenna joins us. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me.
The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter. Hashtag World This Week. Yes, summer's not officially over, but already we now know it's the second hottest one on record here in France. That announcement coming the same week that France's president lost his most popular cabinet member. TV environment show host turned activist Nicolas Hulot providing plenty of drama when he caught everyone cold in the middle of a morning interview on France Inter Radio.
For the first time, I will make the hardest decision of my life. I don't want to lie to myself anymore. I don't want to give the impression that my presence in this government means that we are adequately tackling these challenges. Therefore, I've made the decision to leave the government.
Are you serious?
Yes, I am.
Now, here, I'll turn to you first, Josephine, because you work in Italy, you're from Australia, so political instability, cabinet members shutting the door, you must know a thing or two about that. Can you recall a cabinet member announcing live on radio? He claims he didn't even tell his own wife.
I find it actually quite remarkable, but it's probably a lot more disturbing for Emmanuel Macron at this point.
Can you think of a precedent?
I can't think of a precedent. Can you? Has it happened in France?
We've been scratching our heads. Claude Guibal, what was it like at your radio station? This is your studios where it happened.
Yeah, and I was there actually. It was so weird. There was so much tension, and nobody could expect that. And
apparently his advisors are watching from the other side of the glass.
Actually, I was with his advisors, and they were speechless. Their jaws were like that. And it was so quiet, so silent. Everybody was shocked, and you could see, and you've just seen on these images. His chin was shaking, and he almost got tears in the eyes when he went out of the radio. Yeah, it was a huge and very strong radio moment. It was something quite unbelievable, and it has never happened actually.
Did you have the feeling, because it's about 5 minutes into the interview, was it premeditated?
Well, I'm not in Nicolas Hulot's mind, but I think he took his decision before, but I don't think he expected to come out this way. As the interview unfolded, and there were the calls from the listeners. And, just out of the blue, he said, well, that it was this shock resignation.
We have to remember that he's very much a media person.
Yeah, and
he's not a political figure.
Right. Yeah.
So as a media person, this is like coup de théâtre or something really that he say he didn't know even before or something like that. But probably he knows this particular program, and I don't say it because Claude is here, but this program is very popular in France.
The number one morning radio show.
Number one morning radio, exactly. And this particular time, because the president is away, it's people are back from holiday. He knows it will be the main story for like at least 10 days.
Because environmentalists, I've heard them criticize him, saying, the politics is about compromises and you're better in than out. Your thoughts on that?
Of course, but I'm not Nicolas Hulot. I guess it is. Many friends who are more into environment tell us that it's a very difficult position in a way, because you have to compromise with people who are asking for more growth, for more decisions to release the economy and let the patronat, or the business leaders do whatever they want. And on the other hand, if you're into environment, you have to put a lot of obstacles.
But can I just say, it also looks like a very egotistical decision. It's not appropriate to be doing it on air. Shouldn't he be discussing this with the president? Is it about him trying to recapture his own media career?
Maybe, but, I think it also poses the question of, is it the role of the civil society to be inside the heart of the power?
Because there's several key ministers that come from civil society that are not career politicians. Right
and
now.
actually, career politician and politics is about compromise. And when it comes to environmental issues, they are on different agendas. You know, politics, they need short-term results. They need visible results in order to win the next elections, while environmental issues cannot be solved on the short term. So that needs, you know, a different kind of commitment and a different economic system as well.
Arguably, they were hurting. His presence in the government was hurting his environmentalist credentials, his credentials within the movement, and he was kind of acting as the person holding down Macron's left flank in the government, and he's somebody who's really kind of economically speaking governing from the right.
Macron is,
and Hulot was one of the few people from the left in the government. Without him, I mean, it's really, and polls have already showed. So it's the
end of that neither left nor right that he promised on the campaign trail?
Well, he's kind of been splitting the difference on a number of different issues, but his popularity, the polls that have come out since then, they've shown that his popularity has fallen pretty significantly, 5 points in the polls that have come out since Hulot's resignation.
I want to get back to the point that Amar made a moment ago about you know, the decisions between short-term growth and sustainable growth, and how the two seem antithetic in a way. Back in 1975, France's very first environment minister, when the post was first created, called it the Ministry of the Impossible, Matthew Dalton. Is it the Ministry of the Impossible, the Environment Ministry?
Well, it depends what your goals are. I think Hulot for example, was a very strident anti-nuclear activist, and France depends overwhelmingly on nuclear power. And so if you're looking to...
We've now had a report saying they want to build 6 new next-generation plants.
Right. So if Hulot's goal is to get France to shift radically away from nuclear power, in the kind of pace that he's talking about, arguably that is an impossible goal. Now, there are other things that maybe are possible. Reducing use of pesticides, that was a big issue. The glyphosate, this pesticide produced by Monsanto, that was a big issue for him within the government, trying to get the government to ban that. And Macron wasn't really buying onto that. So there's some goals achievable, others not.
What's very interesting is that he didn't leave on the nuclear or issues like that. He left mainly because of hunting.
Yeah, the last straw was that they lowered
exactly,
the license fee for hunting season from 400 to 200 euros.
Just the day before, on Monday.
That's a wonderful pool of voters for Macron. You know, it will help to boost his popularity in rural
so
areas.
At the end of the day, it's always
over
about
1 million people. Over 1 million people.
1 million hunters in France.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, so it's always about short-term political game, and saving the planet is a long-term endeavor, and therefore no politician can do it?
I think so, François, and there is a dichotomy between the new economic model needed to tackle environmental issues and the immediate needs of the actual model when it comes to growth and employment. So to make a change, it would mean that we need a transition period, and no politician will ever accept to take this risk. If you say, okay, we're going to have like 5 or 10 years and it's going to be hectic, who's going to, take this risk? I don't think.
Short-term gain versus long-term livelihood. That's how some see the battle on the high seas that unfolded this week off France's Normandy coast. Yeah, flares and stones hurled as smaller French fishing vessels outnumbered larger British trawlers Tuesday near the mouth of the River Seine in what the press has dubbed the Scallop War. The French, forbidden by their own law from May to October from netting those prized mollusks that become what we call here coquille Saint-Jacques, but because of a legal loophole, the British are not.
In the end, it paid off because they left. They left, but they got more than 20,000 scallops. As my colleagues have said, we won the battle, but we haven't won the war.
To resolve the dispute have been scheduled for London next Wednesday. The French agriculture minister condemning the violence, but standing by his fishermen. Britain's high-profile pro-Brexit environment minister, of course, sees things differently.
My heart goes out to the fishermen who were caught up in the terrible scenes that we saw that happened earlier this week. And my sympathies are entirely with them. They were fishing entirely legally. They have every right to be in those waters. And we've talked to the French authorities in order to ensure that we have appropriate policing. These are French waters. It's the responsibility of the French to ensure that those who have a legal right to fish can continue to fish uninterrupted.
I'm a little confused. If we're talking about policing, I want to know why there isn't some sort of international maritime intervention here or an EU situation. Obviously, the EU is not going to have any clout once Brexit occurs. But to see this kind of thing happening, it looked like open warfare to me. I got a fright when I saw that vision. I don't understand why it's up to individual governments to make.
So the argument that's being made by is, first of all, there are bilateral agreements between France and the UK, and the European Commission has said as much. This is an agreement between nations when it comes to who gets to fish where inside of these waters. What the French object to is the larger British boats coming in when they're not allowed to be trawling for those mollusks.
Absolutely. I think the French are justified in complaining about that.
Matthew Dalton?
It's a no-brainer.
Well, I'm no mollusk expert, but I do know that
None of us.
I do love to eat them, but I know that seafood is actually a big issue in Brexit because the British British fishermen catch a lot of mackerel. However, the British don't like mackerel, so they export lots and lots of mackerel to the rest of the EU. And one of the big issues in Brexit is trying to maintain access to the EU markets for British mackerel, given that the British have no home market for the mackerel. So this is actually, like, seafood is really an important issue in the whole Brexit debate. And I guess...
And British fishermen voted overwhelmingly for Brexit. They think they're going to be better off once they've left the European Union because 60% of the fishing that takes place in British waters is by non-UK vessels. But again, it's this question of how you fish and sometimes how you overfish.
Coming from an area where people fight for land and where people fight for identity and where people fight for many rights, this really looks like une guerre de riches, a war of rich people fighting over scallops or mussels or things like that. So I'm, as my colleague said, I'm not an expert, but of course we see these scenes while Brexit didn't even happen. What will happen in 5 or 10 years? I mean, are they going to fight with real guns or what?
One of the things with the EU is the EU imposes rules on how much you can fish, fishing stocks. They're quite stringent. And Iceland was considering whether to join the EU, and that's one of the things that was a big issue, is what kind of restrictions.
But their territorial waters are, of course, very far from everybody else's. What's going to happen after Brexit again? And these British fishermen are among the staunchest pro-Brexiteers.
Who knows what's going to happen after Brexit? Come on,
in every sense.
I have no answer. I have no answer at all. But I agree with Amar, with what Amar Abedrabo just said. What's going to happen if on such an issue you have this kind of fight?
And I mean, obviously the agreement that they have means nothing at the moment. Someone needs to have another look at that before Brexit happens.
Well, next Wednesday, of course, is the date. By the way, if at first you don't succeed, try again. There was, we must confess, a certain amount of derision when Theresa May, at a school in South Africa while all this was going on the first leg of her tour of the continent, did what's been described uncharitably by the UK press as a giraffe dance. That didn't stop the British Prime Minister from showing some moves at the tail end of the trip in Kenya, this time at a meeting with scouts devoted to recycling and the environment. Josephine Lekede, your thoughts on
You're jealous.
on what's going on?
Has she just signed her death warrant? I mean, that's not a good look for an international tour, an international visit. I think there might have been a good argument to restrain from any kind of dancing in that sort of setting, given her credibility at the moment is not so high.
I think I think one must never criticize somebody attempting to dance. Let's just have a general policy. Like,
It's better if there are no cameras present.
I think anybody who tries to dance, they should be just, given free rein. I think, more dancing in the world would be good.
I look at it as a photographer, and very often these things are totally made of, totally arranged by spin doctors or press attaché or cabinet, etc. The same day, I think, or the next day, we could see also Macron biking in the streets of Copenhagen. So just the next day after Hulot,
they're photo ops.
they're photo ops, exactly. And
That
so
one
this is the
particularly
limit of photo op. I'm not sure at all she likes the dance or she wants to dance or whatever, but does she have a choice?
Looks more like a photo ambush than an op.
Exactly.
It's like, okay, now dance.
All right, when we come back, we're going to be taking a look at what's possibly been the most trying week of Francis's papacy. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. And joining us, Claude Guibal, senior correspondent for French public radio station France Inter. Also with us, Franco-Syrian photojournalist Amr Abed Rabo, Matthew Dalton, Paris correspondent for The Wall Street Journal, and France 24 Rome correspondent Josephine McKenna here in the French capital in the flesh. Has this been, and I'll put the question to you, Josephine, the most trying week of Francis's papacy? He had his first public appearance on Wednesday since that trip to Ireland over the weekend. He reiterated his contrition over sex abuse and the other scandals that have engulfed the church in Ireland over decades. It all came as well after an arch-conservative prelate penned an open letter accusing the Pope of personally covering up for the former Archbishop of Washington in a separate sex scandal, and the Pennsylvania State Attorney General's accusation that the Vatican long knew of the sex abuse cases that implicated more than 300 priests over 70 years of time. It's been a rough week for the Pope, to put it mildly.
I would say this is the worst week for Pope Francis, and he perhaps made the situation worse by refusing to confirm or deny the allegations made by Carlo Maria Vigano, suggesting that he has been complicit in the cover-up in relation to charges concerning the cardinal in Washington who's now been removed.
Because it is a stunning development for an archbishop to question the Pope.
Yes, but I think what's really interesting about this, it's really brought out into the open the vicious warfare that has been going on in the Vatican since the election of Pope Francis. The Conservatives and the Liberals against each other, and Vigano is aligned with the American Conservatives. He has a reputation for promoting innuendo, and he himself has been accused of quashing an investigation into sex abuse in Minnesota. Having said that, the Pope really does need to confront this head on, and the victims and their supporters are sick and tired of apologies. They want to see structures in place, number one, to ensure that there is going to be justice, that there is a system in place to stop clerical abuse. And that's been a whole lot worse since the Pennsylvania report came down.
A lot worse since the Pennsylvania report came down. The Vatican is officially a state unto its own.
Exactly.
It's an independent state. So the question is it the church that polices itself, or does it hand over prosecution and judicial duties to a third party?
Well, Pope Francis has said he doesn't want to go ahead with a kind of judicial tribunal, establishing a different kind of accountability tribunal within the Vatican. And that has really disappointed survivors, because that was a recommendation from a couple of years ago. He thinks there should be individual investigations and judicial commissions carried out in individual countries. I don't think that's going to be enough to satisfy anyone. And now what's complicating it is that his own credibility is now on the line, and that is just making it way more complicated.
Claude Guibal?
Well, would you say it's a counteroffensive from the conservative insiders in the Vatican? Because ever since Pope Francis was elected in 2013, he was constantly attacking the conservative parts. You remember what he said?
Every Christmas, we had those controversial addresses to the clerics, accusing them of intrigue and secrets and getting too caught up in clericalism. And he's taken them on in his own way. And we all know that when he was elected, he wanted to clean up the Vatican and make it more transparent. Now we have this warfare that one commentator said this week was like putting the Borgias and the Medicis, giving them access to Twitter. So what was once medieval is now way out in the open, and it's really going to create further problems in the future, because particularly in the US church, because the conservatives are seizing on this and now demanding further investigation, demanding a separate bishop synod to look at clerical abuse and how to handle it. It's not going to go away.
Yeah, a U.S. church where many of the faithful are moderate and many of the higher-ups are conservative.
I guess you could characterize that generally. I'm just amazed at how this example of dissent becoming public. I mean, I don't know if there's, maybe you can tell me, but I don't know if there's ever been an example of an internal Roman Catholic Church disagreement coming out into the open like this. I mean, has an open letter like this ever been written by a high-ranking church official, like in recent history?
Well, I'm not a Vatican
decades.
historian.
Yeah.
I mean, we had enough to deal with the VatiLeaks scandal, with all of that intrigue, but that was coming from all sorts of supposedly anonymous sources. This really does open it right up in a way that we haven't seen before. And I think what's amazing in the world of social media and Twitter, it's fermenting. And in particular in Texas, for example, a bishop was urging his parishioners to not only debate it out in the open, but to get onto social media and keep talking about this and keep pushing to get to the bottom of this. So that's why that pressure on Pope Francis is not going to go away, and the pressure for transparency, number one, and also that concern that we're sick and tired of apologies. We want structures in place in this church to deal with, to really create a system of justice and to stop this from happening in the future. So on both counts, Pope Francis has got plenty ahead of him to do.
We're going to turn our attention now to Syria. The UN sounding the alarm over the 3 million civilians who live in the last rebel-held province. Rebels this Friday destroying bridges in the plains of Al-Ghab. That's in anticipation of a Russian-backed offensive to retake Idlib, with talk of humanitarian corridors and also preparations for war.
Idlib is the last major hotbed of terrorists who are speculating on the status of the de-escalation zone, who are keeping the civilian population hostage as human shields, and who are taking up arms in order to negotiate with the government. From every point of view, this abscess needs to be liquidated.
This abscess needs to be liquidated, Amr Abed-Rabo.
It's the same vocabulary we've been hearing for 7 years now. What is very interesting with the Idlib issue is that, of course, they are preparing military, but also it is it's a very sensitive issue for the Turks because it's exactly at their border. And last week, in a very clear way, it's not even secret or hidden or whatever, but they were the foreign ministers of Russia and of Turkey who met in Moscow to talk about this issue. So
and we had that surprise meeting this week by the Iranian foreign minister to Ankara.
Also, of course. So it's interesting, first of all, that this is very openly in a foreign issue, while all these people, I mean, especially the Russians, say we want no foreign intervention in Syria. But it's not even the Syrians who are talking about this. I mean, not the opposition, of course, and not the pro-Bashar people or the ministers. So if there is a military attack, it will be really something dealt with the Turks, and the Turks don't want to have humanitarian catastrophe of 1 or 2 million people coming at their borders. They had this already and they don't want it anymore.
Yeah, because we're confused watching this from the outside. The announcement that Russia was selling these missile defense systems to the Turks at the same time as Turkish-backed militias are with the rebels in Idlib province.
Of course, it is quite confusing. When you look at what's happening also in the south, in Deraa, for instance, once the Russians took it back, they made a deal with the local militias who were rebels, were totally against Bashar, to maintain security inside the city. So it is getting sometimes very, very confusing for us looking at it from far away.
But it's an interesting move from the Russians to put pressure on Turkey, as Turkey is weak these days. I mean, the battle between Turkey and the United States shows how Erdogan is weak. So Putin knows that putting the pressure on Erdogan is the right moment to do.
It is, but he wouldn't like to have him as an enemy. So he would get him to an agreement. We don't know yet which one.
So what does that mean concretely for Idlib? What's going to happen?
Concretely, it could be.
Are we getting ready for out and out war like we've seen in Eastern Ghouta near Damascus, like we've seen in other places?
It could be like it was in Deraa, something like agreements, and no, there wasn't major fightings. There were some kind of agreement, and finally they sorted it out like this. So I can't tell. I can't see in the future. I'm just trying to check. I mean,
when there were agreements in Deraa, people were evacuated to Idlib.
To Idlib, absolutely.
So that's the point.
There's nowhere to evacuate them anymore. So what happens now?
Let's wait and see. But again, it is not at all like I hear it here and there, something like a huge Assad victory. It's again something that is being done by the Russians, by the Turks, by the Iranians, by many other people, and Assad will have to accept whatever they decide.
But if this pocket of resistance is in the end wiped out one way or the other, is that the end of the rebel resistance overall in Syria? Is that the end of the Syrian war?
It is the end of an episode, but I wouldn't say it's the end, because you still have many areas who are not under Assad control. Kurds, for instance, other areas, and then you see that also. I mean, we've been saying for a long time that Daesh was a kind of tool used in a way or another, and now you see it because suddenly Daesh appears in the area of Idlib, and before it was in the area of Suwaida in the south. And how could Daesh move like this freely in the country with all the satellites and with everybody looking at what's happening?
So the speculation is that Assad let
they let them move, and then they can say, "Oh, you see, Daesh is there. We should fight it." And we hear these words of cleansing or cleaning the area, etc.
Yeah. But would you say Assad is a pawn, is a checker in the hands of his allies, such as Russia and Iran? But still, look what's happening now in Idlib. Look what happened in the Ghouta. Look what happened in Aleppo. Eventually, he always managed to impose his own agenda.
For the moment, it's the Russian and Iranian agenda. Honestly, I mean, when you look even at facts like Deraa was taken back 6 or 7 weeks ago now, and Bashar didn't even visit it. He didn't go there. He didn't. I mean, he would love to show how powerful he is and how he took back this area. He didn't go to Aleppo. Aleppo was taken like a year and a half ago now. He never went there. So it shows that there are other people controlling it, Russians, and that they would let him go whenever they feel he is ready for a compromise or he is ready for anything they want. So it's their agenda that is number one.
The United States is bidding farewell this Friday to a queen and a maverick. The funeral of Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul, happening in Detroit, while over in Washington, the casket of longtime Senator John McCain lying in state at the Capitol ahead of his burial at the U.S. Naval Academy in nearby Maryland. The Vietnam War hero would go on to be a two-time Republican presidential candidate. He's hailed as a throwback to bipartisanship, with Democratic Vice President Joe Biden reading a eulogy for him Thursday in his native Arizona.
My name's Joe Biden. I'm a Democrat. We got to know each other well, and he loved my son Bo and my son Hunt. As a young man, he came up to my house. He'd come up to Wilmington. And out of this grew a great friendship that transcended whatever political differences we had or later developed. Because above all, we understood the same thing. All politics is personal. It's all about trust. And I trusted John with my life, and I would. And I think he would trust me with his.
We had Matthew Dalton, one viewer on the hashtag World This Week, quip, but how many of those paying tribute to John McCain would have actually voted for him?
A lot of people would not have voted for him, and a lot of people did not vote for him. They voted for Barack Obama in 2008. He won the presidency by a very large margin, relatively speaking, in American politics. So that was sort of the point of McCain and his legacy, is that you might not agree with him politically. You might disagree with him strongly on some things. On his foreign policy, he was very hawkish, but wide respect across the political spectrum for who he was as a person, what he did, his service in the U.S. military, his time as a prisoner of war in Vietnam. So he was a person who, and there are fewer and fewer of them left in American politics, who transcended partisan lines, who was somebody respected by everybody in Washington.
And are these things that wax and wane, characters that can go across the aisle? Or Josephine was describing the Catholic Church in the era of social media, as politics in the era of social media make it impossible to reach out to the other side.
Well, I think a lot of it is dominated by personalities, and particularly with President Trump in the White House, he's such a polarizing figure, and he's somebody who arouses such strong political emotions in both parties, amongst his supporters and amongst his opponents also, that it's difficult to set aside political feelings and allow personal feelings, personal like or dislike to shine through.
He seems like a character from a different world to me, a gentleman, a man of integrity, even though you may not agree with all of his policies. The one thing I can't get out of my mind, though, is how he ended up with Sarah Palin. And I noticed she's not...
Who's not at the funeral.
She's not going to be at the funeral. And I think that's interesting too. But that campaign, I can't get that out of my head, what a disastrous campaign that was and how they ever got there together in the first place.
Well, he also supported the war in Iraq, so he had many flaws.
Yeah.
But you know what is interesting is I was wondering, had he died 2 years ago, you know, before Trump's election, would there be such a celebration? Probably not, you know. It's because it's such an antithesis of Donald Trump, you know.
And the whole funeral planning seems to have been calibrated against Donald Trump to a certain degree.
Definitely. You know, well, what people are paying tribute to is a man of integrity, a man who had moral values, a man who has backbone, a man who respects his enemies, adversaries, a man committed to multilateralism, ready to make compromise for the sake of the general interest. That's obviously the exact opposite of Donald Trump. So that's what I find interesting is that, and it is sad in a way, you know, that John McCain was not a moderate. He was a maverick, but he was not a moderate. But today we are celebrating him as, you know, the last soul, the last conscience of the
But he was also more nuanced
Republicans
than that too, wasn't he? I mean, he had the ability to cross the floor and make friends, as we saw just there before, on both sides of politics, and to be a little bit inconsistent sometimes. You know, he was a supporter of gun ownership, and yet he took a stand to support greater controls, greater checks after one of the shootings, I noticed.
But I think it's because he was a military. I mean, he was on the field, so he knows.
But he also supported immigrants as well, at various times. So
I mean, he was very conservative on a number of things, not so conservative on other things. But above all, he was somebody who was not mean-spirited, I think, and that's
a great word.
He was a likable person. He was not mean-spirited. He did not hold a grudge. I have a good friend who is a journalist in Washington and interviewed John McCain many times, and after one piece that he did on McCain, McCain refused to talk to him for several years, and then he was doing a stand-up on camera one time in Congress, and McCain just happens to walk by him in the hallway and does kind of bunny ears behind him, and then tweets the clip and says, revenge after all these years. So he was somebody who...
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's a great story, but he was somebody who had a sense of humor.
Did he talk to him afterwards?
Yeah, the ice was broken. The ice was broken. There was a thaw. He followed him around on the campaign trail after that. So he was somebody, he had a sense of humor. He was not mean-spirited. He was a gentleman in many respects. And that, you can draw certain parallels to other people in Washington.
It's really...
Yes, but he's but he's a gentleman who, as you said, with Sarah Palin, he opened the door to the extreme right in a way. I mean,
exactly.
and liberated the speech. I mean, and that led to Trump's election.
Exactly.
So maybe he was feeling guilty in a way.
But,
and
and he recognized he made a mistake.
No, Sarah Palin's
still, I mean, we should not forget this.
Sarah Palin's nomination, if anything, it was a blow to the extreme right because, I mean, she came across as so politically... Though she came from that spectrum of the party, she came across as so politically inept that arguably it set back the cause for a few years.
We're going to have to leave it there, but I want to thank you so much, Matthew Dalton. I want to thank Claude Guibal, Amar Abed-Rabbo, as well as Josephine McKenna. Stay with us, though. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Emma James. We've been talking about John McCain's legacy.
Indeed.
How about Aretha Franklin, her funeral taking place this Friday in Detroit?
Yes, absolutely. And as you would expect, for the Queen of Soul, she is getting a very fitting send-off. And as has been warned by many people, including Panama Jackson in The Route, the scheduled 5.5 hours for this service is not expected to be adhered to. In fact, and at the moment, they're about 2 hours behind schedule.
2 hours behind?
Yes. And then what he says in this article is, you don't get to be the Queen if your legacy ends when you expire. Every accolade and celebration at her homegoing will be warranted and necessary. Now, he thinks, and he says he's not being facetious, he reckons it's going to last for 12 hours. We will have to wait and see if that is an accurate assessment of this amazing event. It is incredible.
Well, if you're watching the rebroadcast, you know.
Yes, absolutely, indeed. At the moment, still in full swing, very much so. And it is a wonderful, wonderful event, much in the same ilk as Muhammad Ali's funeral, which was very much bringing people together and a real, genuine celebration. This gentleman says, I hope when I die, I'm worthy of even a fraction of what is happening at Aretha Franklin's funeral. We all hope that. I don't think any of us have much chance, really, of achieving
and there's the whole schedule of events. Right?
Absolutely. It is a very lengthy schedule, as you can see. There is the hashtag Aretha Homegoing, people giving a sort of live commentary to everything that's happening at that funeral. Other tributes that have been paid today, more than 100 Cadillacs, pink Cadillacs, most importantly, turned up outside the funeral home and went along sort of forming a cortege, if you like. And that is because she didn't do the song Pink Cadillac. Some people have fallen into that trap. She did a song called Freeway of Love, which featured a pink Cadillac, and that is why there is a sea of pink Cadillacs out there in Detroit today. The Free Detroit Free Press, has this full-page advert from Cadillac, and really that is the best paper to be looking at right now for all things Aretha. They are writing.
That's right, because Cadillac, of course, General Motors, it's made in the Detroit area.
Absolutely. Now they're also reporting on the fact that she's had 4 different costume changes this week, which is something that's incredibly unusual, a little bit strange as well. But they detail what she was wearing, the colours of the outfits, and the fact that she favoured Christian Louboutin shoes throughout. And she's wearing gold today to match her casket, which some feel is fitting for the Queen of Soul. Another unusual tribute has been paid at Buckingham Palace today. Changing of the guard took place at midday, a little bit less sombre than your usual fare. Take a look at this clip. There you go. And some
That's going to be in my head all evening, you know that.
I know. I love it when these kind of traditional bands start doing different types of music. We had it here on Bastille Day with Daft Punk being played. This Twitter user says, from one queen to another, wondering whether maybe it was Queen Elizabeth who set that one up. It's more likely it was actually the army's decision itself. They tweeted today, respect for others underpins all we do, so it was no surprise that the Welsh Guards band, that's who was actually playing, paid tribute to the musical icon and inspiration. So anyone who got to see that got a real treat. Another British person paying tribute is Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones, who posted this video from 1986 where she joined them on stage. Now, I'd never seen this before. She's performing Jumping Jack Flash. Go and have a listen to it. It is absolutely fabulous. And of course, but she was so much more than a singer. She was also a hero of civil rights. And this writer, on the French version of the Huffington Post, he wrote a book about her, Aretha Franklin, Portrait of a Natural Woman. And what he says is that without Aretha Franklin demanding respect, we may never have had Barack Obama in the White House. Now, interestingly, Barack Obama and Michelle Obama are not there today, which some people have been commenting on. They've been a little bit disappointed by. They weren't able to attend, but he did send a letter which is going to be read out, or perhaps already has been, by Reverend Al Sharpton.
Because she performed at both his and Bill Clinton's
Yes, and a lot of people commenting on the fact that we saw Barack Obama moved to tears by one of her performances in 2015 when she sang Natural Woman. And so I think people did expect to see him. But the letter is beautifully written, as you might expect. He says at the end, Aretha truly was one of a kind, and as you pay tribute, know we'll be saying a little prayer for you.
All right, many thanks for that, Emma James. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.